Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, Happy Days will be here again. It's happening. We're working on it. It's okay. Last time I feel like you were a little bit broken, Trent. You were like, oh, Happy Days, I don't know. So I'm here with the optimism, and I'm saying we're building the Happy Days. They're on their way. Happy Days are coming. This is Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer. I'm one of your hosts, Caitlin Green, linguist, editor, writer, parent, paid protester, all the things. And with me is Trent Nelson, of course, co-host of the podcast, editor, writer, philosopher, historian, king. And here we are, ready to talk about some more cool people doing really nice, cool stuff, right?
Oh, paid protester as well. Don't forget my Soros check. Well, Caitlin, we have been in the midst of some real interesting, terrible stuff. We've been talking Venezuela since the new year began. Really outrageous kidnapping. The president of a different country did not have that on the 2026 bingo card. But we're actually here today to talk to one of our favorite people. He's a return guest. We like those Caitlin mentioned last time. We love a good return guest.
Feels like a win every time we get one to come back.
It's validation that we're good at talking on camera. Well, this time we've got Greg Sargent. You know him just like we do. You can find him over at the New Republic. He's writing wonderful work. And also, of course, you can find him with the Daily Blast, their daily podcast, only about 22-ish minutes. You can afford that if you can afford us. A wonderful piece came out in the middle of December, written by you, of course, and it was talking about the history of Stephen Miller and of his family, which is a really, really fascinating topic. All of us being the children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren of immigrants. Well, he is too, and doesn't seem like he's very grateful for that. Could you tell us a bit about your piece, and then we can jump into some of the details about people like Wolf Leib and the Glazers?
Well, listen, thanks for having me on, guys. You know I love liberal currents, so anyway.
We're big fans.
We love you too, sir.
Well, yeah, so one of the things we did was we obtained an unpublished history of Miller's ancestors' immigration to the United States that was written by his grandmother. Now, this history has been written about here and there, but we actually got a copy and we published it online for the first time. It's a book by his grandmother, and it's actually a pretty good book about the ancestors of Miller and how they came to the U.S. and their hardships and so forth and so on. And if you read our piece at tnr.com, it links to the book, a PDF of it, and you can read it yourself, people. It's very good. At least it's really interesting to look at, particularly in light of the enormous amount of power Miller has now over the future of our immigration system. So we went through that history a little bit, what his ancestors went through. We dug pretty deeply, we think, into Miller's deeper ideology and worldview and the sources of his anti-immigrant animus, and that's the piece. We hope you'll check it out.
Yeah, that's so it was 1906, was it, that his great-great-grandfather? How many greats?
So it was actually 1903 that Wolf Leib Glasser, who's Stephen Miller's great-grandfather, first arrived at Ellis Island. He became a seller of bananas on street corners, and the book describes that fact, that he was a street peddler and he was very poor. They came from wrenching poverty. He was able to bring over some relatives, and eventually the Glassers established themselves in business in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and did quite well. Interestingly enough, Stephen Miller, I'm told, I haven't confirmed this, but I'll throw it out there. I'm told that at a rally in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I believe during the 2016 campaign, Miller actually brought up this history, which is pretty interesting. Anyway, they were able to succeed there. But what we get into at some length is that people like Miller's ancestors, people like Wolf-Leib Glasser, were subjected to racial bigotry and hatred that really tracks very closely with the stuff that Miller says about today's immigrants. And we got into the sources of that worldview and so forth. People like Wolf-Leib Glasser were seen through the prism of race science at the time. But there was also a sort of strain in the discourse at the time, in the politics, that treated people like Wolf-Leib Glasser as fundamentally unfit and unassimilable into U.S. democracy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Miller's rhetoric, that's how he talks about immigrants from the quote-unquote third world. They're really big on that now, and that's how a lot of MAGA talks about Somalis.
I was just going to read a quote from Stephen Miller on Fox from December when he was interviewed. And it sounds exactly like this, what his family faced, right? He said, with a lot of these immigrant groups, not only is the first generation unsuccessful, again, Somalia is a clear example, but you see very persistent issues in every subsequent generation. You see consistent high rates of welfare use, high rates of criminal activity, consistent failures to assimilate. And this is lies. Like, it's not really true, right? Immigrants are consistently lower offenders in terms of crime in the US. And it's just a way for him to say that they're not really Americans.
Right, exactly. They're not fit to be Americans, right? And it's funny that he puts it that way because the first generation of his immigrant ancestors were very poor as well, and a lot of the exact same stuff was said about them. They'll never be able to assimilate. Now, the truth is that today's immigrant groups actually have assimilated quite successfully, and as successfully as past immigrant groups have, according to research that I looked at and wrote about in the piece. So Miller's basically full of shit, and also it's disgusting for him to, deny the benefits of being a part of U.S. society and a part of American life that he and his family members thrived off of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely.
Another fun fact about Somalis in Minnesota specifically: 87% of them are naturalized citizens of the United States. What a wildly high number for people. And we all know the process of getting naturalized is actually pretty intensive.
Yes, that's right. I think it's worth underscoring as well that, a lot of these people went through really rigorous processes, as you say, to become citizens. And a lot of them actively want to become citizens and appreciate American institutions. One of the fundamental lies that Miller and all his people tell is that there's, some sort of deep-seated hatred of the United States and its way of life and so forth. In fact, we dug up some quotes along those lines that from Miller. We have a bunch of Miller quotes in there in the piece. They're pretty hair-raising, and we laid them all out. And he says exactly that kind of thing, which is that what civilization would ever open its doors to people who hate it? And it's a complete lie. These people are banging down our doors because they want to be part of us, a part of our civilization. And it's just beyond disgusting for him to traffic in that kind of rhetoric. As we put it in the piece, he's kind of moved the charmed circle, the civilizational charmed circle outwards, right? At the time that his ancestors came to the United States, Southern and Eastern Europeans were seen as unassimilable and unfit to participate in U.S. democracy and American life. And now, obviously, his story disproved that pretty resoundingly, and the story of millions and millions and millions of others did as well. And so now he's just moved the circle. So now who's outside the circle are people from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so forth. The third world, as they love to say.
Well, his whole mythology, all of the things he tries to invoke, it actually sort of shows you, it kind of gives you a glance inward to see why they actually hate public education so much, because public education is one of the great symbolizing tools that exists in our society. You come to this wonderful country and we love you so much, but then you have children and they instantly hang out with Joey and Jack and Quan and Louise, and they are just saying skibbity and being just regular old
No,
American
not
children, just like the rest of them. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's so many reasons, obviously, but that's one of the reasons why they hate this, because this is actually this is a tool we have that brings people in, makes them feel a part of us, and continues to grow our civilization.
Right, and another component of the argument is the civilizational threat that immigrants supposedly pose. Now, so we actually were able to get Steve Bannon to tell us who informed Miller's worldview on this notion that immigrants constitute a threat to quote unquote Western civilization. Where does this come from? And Steve Bannon, who occasionally answers our texts, not that often, but occasionally for some reason he still does, which I'm grateful for, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah.
He said that Spengler, Huntington, and Pat Buchanan were key formative influences for Stephen Miller in that worldview. And so we looked at some language from Pat Buchanan and compared it directly to language from Stephen Miller and found that they were really pretty precisely aligned. Buchanan wrote a book in 2011 called Suicide of a Superpower. And in a companion column to that, Buchanan declared that Western civilization probably won't survive the passing of the European peoples. Ancestors created it and their replacement by third world immigrants. And now Buchanan is very explicit in lamenting the coming extinction of the white race and European peoples, right? And saying essentially that if the white race passes, civilization disappears with it. Now, you take that and line it up against some of Miller's exact language. For instance, one quote, here's a great one. If you import the third world, you become the third world. That's Stephen Miller.
That's the famous one. Yeah.
Right. And he talked about the Biden immigration agenda as being something like the assisted suicide of Western civilization. So you'll note the similarities in language. The only word that's missing from Stephen Miller's version is the word white. Right?
Yeah.
Every other word basically lines up with exactly the Pat Buchanan worldview.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd just rather frame it in terms of like regions of the earth as opposed to specific. And he does this thing where he's like, oh, they, the state of Somalia as a country is somehow like embedded in the people that come here. And so like he says he said that you will replicate the conditions they left, right? If you bring them over. And so it's as if they have this kind of stain on themselves that they bring here, which is simply like, it would be so wild to blame the failures of the leadership of a nation on the individuals who clearly dislike it so much that they left, right?
But that is exactly what was going on 100, 110, 120 years ago. We were looking at places like Italy and Eastern Europe and being like, we don't want people from there. They can't even like have a country, like all of these terribly like racist and xenophobic ideas.
Right.
But they've survived, they've carried on. And I know this is sort of intersecting with what we just went through, but I still struggle, even understanding, the origins of his belief. I still struggle to understand how he got to here, even remembering the 2006 Duke lacrosse case,
right,
where he's like a huge advocate. That's where he like first gains national prominence, like going on the O'Reilly factor and really being the loudest person talking about that horrific incident. Like he was just a young person at that point still, and yet he's already like ingrained in this idea. And
right.
What was going on in his teenage years?
I mean, yeah, why was he such a piece of crap as a teenager, right? Like, because you have a normal person reads Spengler and Buchanan and goes, well, that sucks. But he didn't.
So, yeah, in those days, he was also influenced heavily by David Horowitz, who passed away recently, had very similar views on a lot of these matters. I do think it's worth underscoring that, of course, for the right, this idea of the West under siege from the third world really has a long history, including among, I guess, conservatives who you don't immediately think of as explicit white nationalists. But what happened was people like Buchanan and I guess to an extent Horowitz really made the white nationalist, the ethno-nationalist piece of it much more explicit and harder. And we talk about that. I talked to Laura Field as well, the author of a great new book, Furious Minds. She had a great quote essentially summing up this worldview. And she said this quote, "The basic idea is that if you don't come from a cultural background that comes from a traditional Western perspective, ideally Anglo-Saxon, then you aren't equipped for and properly formed for freedom." Close quote. And I thought that was nicely put. And, it's a good book, Furious Minds, her book.
We'll link. The bookshop link will be in the description. Awesome. Yeah, I think this is really something that we tend to leave out of our national memory. Like, we just forget how racist we have been against like the Irish and the Russians and like people that right now we would consider to be like totally white. But if you look at the white nationalist blogs that are being written even today, they have not forgotten. No. And in fact, it's a little bit wild that, Stephen Miller he's like trying to write himself into the history of white America by saying like, well, really, it was like the 1920s when we started making mistakes. Or no, the 1920s was when we were doing it right? When we had the racial quotas. And so that like backdates his arrival in 1903 as a part of like the good groups. When the white nationalists of today would say no.
Right. No. And at the time, they didn't allow that either, right? Like they didn't say you're part of the good pre-1924 class.
Right. No, it's not happening.
By the way, we also report on, and this is a somewhat known fact, but not very well known, that Miller himself actually wrote positively about the 1924 immigration law, which imposed racial quotas on immigration. And the point we really try to get at in this piece is that, for Miller, he's trying to undo the world that was created by the 1965 Immigration Act, which is the one that undid the racial quotas of the 1924 Act. And, we're in this period right now where this quote unquote new right is trying to relitigate civil rights and so forth. They're also trying to relitigate the 1965 Act in a major way. Stephen Miller constantly talks about how that was the point at which things really started to go to shit. And it's bullshit. It's a bullshit argument. He would never admit right out that he wants racial quotas in immigration again. But they're kind of doing that in real life because they've essentially ended the acceptance of refugees, except including white South Africans, which means essentially it's U.S. policy now to privilege white people for refugee status. And, I think we need to be clear what it means that they're trying to relitigate this 1965 law. And one last point on this, the 1965 Act was actually a real achievement. And it's sort of, not thought of that way because it's just sort of not as prominent as things like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. For obvious reasons. But similar coalitions and similar movements accomplished that. The opening up of the world to, other groups from around the world. Now, they want to get rid of that world entirely. They want to reimpose racial quotas. They want to ethnically re-engineer the United States along the lines of their vision. And we got to fight that.
Absolutely. And it does bear noting that that 1924 Act was literally decades of work by the xenophobes to get there. They had been pushing for legislation for over a quarter of a century.
It's not natural to do that. Yeah, let me read what Lyndon B. Johnson said on the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act of
Fantastic.
1965. He said, men of needed skill and talent were denied entrance because they came from Southern or Eastern Europe or from one of the developing continents. This system violated the basic principle of American democracy, the principle that values and rewards each man on the basis of his merit as a man. It has been un-American in the highest sense because it has been untrue to the faith that brought thousands to these shores even before we were a country. So if you're going to take that, and Stephen Miller says he called it the single largest experiment on a society, on a civilization that had ever been conducted in human history, you can't read that any other way, right? He's saying
Right.
that fairness and equality was a failed experiment. It hurt our country, and we need to undo it. There's no ambiguity there, really.
Yeah, again, his language parallels pretty precisely the language of Pat Buchanan. And of course, John Ganz's very good book talked about how, When the Clock Broke, it's called, talked about how there was this hard ethno-nationalist edge to Buchananism that was, rooted in David Duke and figures like that. And Stephen Miller is a mouthpiece for all those ideas in the present, very clearly.
Right. Yeah, and like it's just so selective, right? To say like, oh yeah, well, the 1965 Immigration Act is an experiment on a nation, but 1924 wasn't. Like, why wouldn't that be also an experiment on a civilization?
One point about the sort of the bigotry that led up to the 1924 Act and all that intellectual ferment, if you can call it that. Those ideas were the ones that were directed at people like Stephen Miller's relatives, right?
Right.
And here's a really interesting little nugget for you all. In the book by Stephen Miller's grandmother that we posted online, there's some powerful criticism of the 1924 Act. And essentially what the book says is that people, a lot of people from the home region that Miller's original relatives came from died in World War II after the doors were slammed in the United States.
Yeah. Stephen Miller's uncle noted that as well, I believe.
Yes, he did.
On one of the programs. And that's really powerful. But again, in this country of immigrants and of their successors, it is striking that we have a president whose family we very well know migrated from Germany, the Drumpfs, and Buchanan, Irish, right? Such a long history of terror by the English, and we have Stephen Miller, right, whose family fled pogroms and terrible oppression. It is sickening, but I mean, a lot of what this piece does setting up is to sort of illustrate what they see as what they'd like to do. What would they like to do more specifically to our civilization?
Well, ethnically re-engineer it for one thing. A lot of you have seen that tweet from the Department of Homeland Security Twitter feed, which, by the way, has really become an absolute cesspool of white nationalism. It's very explicit and disgusting. But the DHS Twitter feed said, in essence, that their project is to remove 100 million people, right? If you haven't seen that tweet, look it up. Just Google DHS Twitter feed 100 million and you'll find it. And while you're at it, like, look at some of the imagery they're using. It's really kind of lionizing this vision of the homeland as a kind of providentially ordained thing, almost divinely ordained for the, inheritors of quote unquote Western civilization. Yeah. And of course, that whole view of the United States as inheritor of Western civilization is deeply flawed, and it's civilizational supremacy and so forth. But, they're very clear about their project, which is to undertake really vicious mass expulsions backed by heavily armed government militias, which are not accountable to the law anymore in any real sense, because as we saw in Minneapolis, this ICE officer who shot and killed Renee Good clearly was not in any danger of any kind. and clearly had no justification to do this shooting. And to have the entire leadership of the Homeland Security apparatus, from Kristi Noem, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, every one of them, saying that what that officer did was justified, is a way to send the message to the three of us and people just like us that if you stand in the way of this ethnic re-engineering of the United States, you just might die. You might be killed.
Right. And nothing makes them more frightened and enraged than looking them in the eye and saying, "No, I understand that you're threatening me. I'm just not interested. I'm not going to be
Right. I
I'm
think
not
we're
going to be backing down."
I think we're seeing a really heartening cultural response, and I'm going to continue to insist that this is highly significant. Right?
Yes.
I tried to argue this on, all the socials and stuff, but, if you look at the DHS Twitter feed, and if you look at the way DHS is doing its propaganda, its racial propaganda right now, they send camera crews along on these ICE raids, and they produce all these slick propaganda videos which portray these ICE agents heavily armed as something like liberating heroes who are being gratefully received by desperate Americans who are under the thumb of the world the 1965 Act made, right? But, the rest of us are out there with our phones, and we're all recording this stuff, and we are overwhelming their propaganda with real information. And, we're seeing in the polling that ICE is really a pariah agency at this point. It's in the toilet. It's approval. I think there was a new poll today from Data for Progress that showed a majority would back prosecution of the ICE officer who shot Renee Good, and a majority rejects the administration's arguments that it was justified. So that's really great to see. And of course, Trump's approval is in the toilet on immigration as well. So, I just want to say to everyone out there, every one of you who takes one video, is contributing something.
Right.
That's right.
It's a great point.
Because we can see with our eyes that we are under siege, yes, but it's not by immigrants, right? No. The people who are hurting us and coming into our homes against our will and breaking our stuff and scaring our children is the agents of DHS, CBP, ICE, HSI. That's who's actually terrorizing us.
Right.
And the Wall Street Journal had this really striking report that people should look at, which found that since July, federal agents have fired weapons into civilian vehicles 13 times since July. Right? So I'm not very good at math, but that's like something. What is that? Two per month?
Approximately.
Right.
Yeah. So
completely out of control. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Completely out of control. Roving, heavily armed government militias, roaming through our cities, beating the shit out of citizens, as well as out of immigrants, terrorizing people, and being told by the elected leadership of the United States that they can do this with impunity. That's what they're being told.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned, the goal of taking out 100 million individuals, right, from the community. Well, doing that without replacing them, right, it would be a remarkable shrinkage of the nation and of its economy, of its functional capabilities. But that, of course, they want them replaced with either, white women having 8 children, or refugees from South Africa or Scandinavia, which thinks that's very funny, by the way. They think it's very funny that we want refugees from their country. They're like, we have like VATs. We have like cool taxes and stuff. We don't want to go there.
Right. And they love saying it. Trump loves saying it out loud, right? It's a coming out party for these guys.
I was just going to say I failed because I tapped out at 2. I didn't have 8. Sorry, guys. But, they're from English Norwegian stock, so they should be really valued. But the fact that they're being raised by woke people, of course, invalidates their quality.
Yeah, seriously. I think there's one other point that we get into this in the piece at some length, and I hope people check it out. But, there's another argument underneath all this that Stephen Miller and especially J.D. Vance and others like that make, which is that in some sense, the world created by the 1965 Act, the mass immigration that's happened, has been a deep threat to social cohesion or social solidarity or whatever term
Right.
they want to use for that. Now, there's been a lot of research, which, it's a little mixed, but a lot of it debunks the idea that immigrants actually do, dissolve social bonds or whatever language you want to use. But we should be clear on this point. Like, what they're doing is the biggest threat to social cohesion that you can conceive of, right? MAGA is a much bigger threat to social cohesion than immigrants are.
Right. They're constantly eroding our trust in each other and our safety. So.
In reality, they are the unassimilated ones. That's the irony, of course, of all
Yes.
is that they are the unassimilated ones. The rest of us are all chilling,
They're the 100 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
Yeah.
Well, like we've all had the experience, right, of the MAGA uncle who cannot not bring up MAGA stuff, right? Where you're just like, oh, it's a nice day out today. And they're like, yeah, because of Trump or whatever. And you're like, what are you doing? Like, I'm just talking about the weather. I always recall, like, early on in my teaching job, I was making these beautiful vocabulary flashcards to help my students. And I posted a picture of one, and it was the word sycophant. And one of my MAGA family members commented, oh, yeah, like Biden. And I was like, what are we doing? I'm talking about flashcards I made for children. Could we calm down, right? Like, they just can't be normal.
Yeah, and so on this idea that they're out of the mainstream and we aren't, right? Like, you have a certain type of centrist liberal pundit who responds to this sort of stuff with a little bit of fear, right? Like, they go in and they say, well, maybe J.D. Vance has a point when he says immigration is dissolving our social bonds, and maybe people are voting for Trump because communities are disintegrating, and maybe immigration has something to that. We need to appear very sensitive to that in order to get Trump voters to stop voting for authoritarians, right? Like, that's sort of the take you hear from a certain type of centrist liberal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Horrendous.
I don't want to scoff too much at the MAGA argument, but I will point this out, right? The data that we've seen strongly suggests that the American people reject the MAGA argument on an ideological level, on a very deep ideological level. Like, if you look at polling that actually asks people, do you support removing immigrants, undocumented immigrants who have been in this country for some time, who have jobs, who don't have criminal records? You find a majority, right? A majority of Americans opposes removing those people. And, similarly, you have people like Joe Rogan saying, what the fuck are you guys doing? You are the ones who are breaking up our communities, ICE, right? I think a majority agrees with us that the social bonds and communitarian bonds between native-born Americans and citizens and immigrants is a real thing to cherish and protect, and that they're the threat to our social cohesion in that sense.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's where all this language about assimilation is really gross, right? Because if by assimilation you mean acting exactly like me, then okay, yeah, probably most immigrants will not manage to do a perfect Caitlin impression. That's not their job, though. Their job is to live their life, right? And by living as a functioning member of American society, that is as assimilated as you need to be. There's no like extra level of sort of white passing act, speaking perfectly American sounding English, only doing the religions that we already accept as normal here in our small town that's super white and everyone's Protestant anyway. Like, that's not necessary, and it's not healthy.
Yeah. Nobody speaks English as well in America as my immigrant grandmother. Okay, and I'll put that against anybody right now. It's nonsense. And again, I wish the centrists would be more afraid of the fascism that made them stop trying to discriminate more against people. right? It would be better if they were afraid of fascism and instead were like, so we're going to make and take a very strong stance to protect people, just as the fascists are making very strong stances against people, and see where the chips fall. And as you just noted, Greg,
Yes.
the chips fall on our side.
Well, I will point out that if you look at what people like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois and Gavin Newsom are doing in California, they are doing what you are talking about, which is they are standing up for the idea that, our native-born Americans and citizens and immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, sort of share in one another's economic and social fates, as it were. And that is a resonant message. And I really think that some of the centrist liberals don't understand how powerful something like that could actually be at a time like this, when we're seeing what, the version of MAGA that JD Vance offers in his very, pious interviews with Ross Douthat of the New York Times, or whatever, when he's on his best behavior, which he is with Douthat, right? Is this sort of soft thing where all I care about is social cohesion, and so that frightens these centrist pundits. They're like, oh, I better care about social cohesion too, right? And so, but the thing is, the country is now seeing what JD Vance actually means when he says that, right? And that's an opportunity for us and for Democrats to say, here's our vision of unity of the nation, and stand up for it.
Right. Yeah, it's social cohesion when, there's Spanish language translations of things that people need to use in my town. That's social cohesion. That's making sure everybody's included.
And the thing is, I think a lot of people really intuitively grasp that, right? Like, if you watch Joe Rogan talk about this stuff, okay, he's not exactly a political theorist, right? But he's good at voicing intuitions, right? Like, I strongly recommend just look up some clips of Joe Rogan talking about ICE raids, and then ask yourself, why wouldn't Democrats look at that and say to themselves, hey, you know what? Like, these information spaces we really struggle to reach, like the manosphere, or, the young men who, were losing, those types of places, those information spaces. This ICE stuff is penetrating in there. And people in those information spaces hate it. They hate the ICE stuff. So let's, as Democrats and liberals, go into those information spaces and say, we've got a better way.
Well, look at this. Yeah.
And that's such a big part of it, is that, the manosphere exists to so many degrees because right-wing people are like, yeah, I'll go on the show. Yeah, I'll go talk about it. Yeah, I'll go do this. Like, we, even in our disdain for some of the individuals, we have to go on and be like liberal positive stuff. Right? Free society stuff, right? Because Joe Rogan, if you watch any clips, if you listen, he's not a massive pushback guy. You can go on the show and say anything you want.
He's fairly, but you do have to be prepared to do that correctly, because it's no good if you go on there and you just fall into the regress to the mean of Joe Rogan guests. You have to be strong and ready.
No, you've got to make him call on Jamie. Jamie, check out healthcare right now, right? You've got to have him do that. Jamie, look up healthcare costs right now. You need him to do that, because otherwise, you're right, you'll fall into that same, dithering nonsense that he brings all of his guests to.
Well, I think the liberal current's overlord himself, Adam Gurry, didn't he talk about how you've got to, You've got to proactively represent the open society as a positive thing. That was good stuff from him.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, just to point out from a layperson's perspective, look at the tweets from the DHS. Look at the way that they're talking about people you probably know, right? Isn't the vibes are rancid. It is bad. It is bad-natured. It's cruel. It's stupid. It's proudly stupid. And let's talk about that. How, do you really want to be that guy? They're acting like it's fun and cool to bully and hurt people.
And
It's
it's
not.
It's fucking juvenile is what it is as well. And it's just like,
Yeah.
shut up. This is just bullshit.
No,
Like nobody
it's
agrees with
schoolyard
this.
bully shit.
It
It's
is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really is.
I wanted to bring it back to Stephen Miller because really his start came in school as an actual child, right? Just a deeply unpleasant, bad child. Like, I don't know how to deal with somebody like that, right? Who like just resented the existence of other people in his neighborhood and at his school.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we were actually able to talk to his cousin on his father's side, and that might be a good place to close.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You may all recall that over the summer, I believe it was, his cousin erupted on social media. I forget where exactly. Her name is Alyssa Casmer, and she really condemned Stephen Miller in some sort of post. And, then that was all we heard from her. She didn't do any interviews, but, she did agree to talk to us. And I'll just read you what she said, because this really shows you that what Miller's done is really not being received at all well in the family either. She said, quote, "We're Jewish. We grew up knowing how hated we were just for existing. Now he's trying to take away the exact thing that his own family benefited from, that ability to create a life for themselves, to prosper, to build community." There's that word, community. To have successful businesses, to live a rewarding life, close quote. That sounds pretty good to me. I was really glad that she said that, and I'm sure she caught a lot of grief for it.
Yeah.
I think, the main sort of image that I think of with Stephen Miller is like pulling the ladder up behind him, right?
Yeah.
He's benefited from all this stuff, and he's like, nobody after me. Absolutely not.
Right, and not only that, but they also need to be seen as the victims. It's like there's this overwhelming and insatiable greed, right? They just have to get everything. They get the way of life, they get the benefits of being Americans, and they get to be regarded as victims and not aggressors as well. We have to give them everything.
They see themselves rightly not as victims, although we see them as victims, or we see them seeing themselves as victims. They consider themselves underdogs, right? Which actually gets all of the things that you're talking about.
It's so romantic, actually, being
They're
an
heroic as well, right? We have to see them as heroic. Like, they just have to have everything.
Mm-hmm. They overcame all the odds.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Well, sir, we like to have everything as well. We like to have a good long chat with you, Greg Sargent of the New Republic. Really a pleasure. But we've got to let you go because you are a busy man boogieing all about the world. Can you remind us where we can read your work? Can you remind us
and
about
listen?
the Daily Blast? Yes, we need Daily Blast information. Give us all the tea if you could.
Yes, sure. You can find us at tnr.com or newrepublic.com. And as of today, my Twitter account has been hacked, so you can't find me there. It's been hijacked and taken over. I don't know if I'm going to get it back. I'm trying, but maybe by the time people listen to this, I have. But, you can find me on Blue Sky at Greg T. Sargent. And we do a daily podcast, the New Republic's podcast. It's called the Daily Blast. It's on at tnr.com and on Apple and on Spotify. Runs 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and the episodes are very short, so we're not asking much. It's just around 20 to 22 minutes a day. So that's where you can find me.
Just a commute.
Just a commute.
Perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Greg, sir, we appreciate you so much. Greg Sargent, New Republic. Won't you come back sometime, do it all over again with us?
Of course. Anytime you want. Love coming on with you guys.
Thank you.
We are so
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was a great discussion. I really loved all of the detail. That article is amazing. Of course, we've talked about the book Hate Monger, which is about Stephen Miller and his upbringing in the past. And it does do a little bit of like psychologizing of him, which I find very interesting. And like, it is really hard to wrap my mind around the idea that this is like a dude who just has sucked forever. Like, I don't know. As like a parent to children, I'm like, are some kids just like bad people?
Well, and that's what I was gonna get to. At the end of our discussion with Greg, right? Yeah, like this is just a piece of shit kid, right? And I'm so hesitant to ever be like it's the child's fault, right? But I'm just struggling as much as I think anyone else to like conceive of like how does like a 12-year-old child like
Right.
decide that this is who they are. But I mean, in a family where everyone is not like that, it seems very
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah, no, it drives me absolutely up the wall because yeah, like as a parent, I don't want to look around at like the kids in my kids' class and be like, is one of these kids a piece of shit? Like, I hope not. They're all so lovely. And like it's hard to I want to see Stephen Miller at like 6 years old, right? And be like,
Right.
is that a nice kid? Is 6-year-old Stephen
Right.
Miller a nice kid?
Right.
Because certainly like 16-year-old Stephen Miller was a full-on piece of shit. Right. He
Atrocious.
was out
Right.
there being like, leave your trash around because we pay people to take care of that. And it's like, what are we doing, bro? Like, as class president, I promise to never make you pick up your own shit again. Like, fuck you, dude. Anyway, he's a bad guy. And yeah, his family has said like this doesn't make any sense with our family history. And we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about the word of 2025.
Right.
But we know that the world of the white nationalists, which is a lot of who's in the government right now, right?
Yeah.
We know that like these social media accounts are being run by straight up groypers, right? They're using their memes and they're using their language. We know that like we talked to Amanda about this, right? Like there's groypers in the administration. We know this. And so like to be walking around being like, hi, I'm Stephen Miller and I don't count as a real American according to you, but please continue to let me like be here is just like so mind-blowing, right? Because like I said, he talks about the 1920s racial quotas and the preference for white immigrants in America as like the normal default proper natural way to run this country. Right. And what it does is it rewrites history so that his family's arrival in the 1900s is part of that good normal white America. Meanwhile, we're reading stuff about heritage Americans versus paperwork Americans versus one of these articles even mentions Stephen Miller as what they call an ally American, which is it's a non-American according to them, where they're like, you're not part of this group, but you're helping us achieve our ends, which concludes in throwing you in the pit with the rest of them.
It reminds me of the old term that was more popular in the early portion of the 20th century, the alibi X, right? So you are a Jewish person who is in the Nazi regime, is siding with the Nazi regime, right? Like this is the example that like we're not actually doing all of these bad things, right? Like how could we? We've got like a black friend, right? Like we've got like a Jewish friend. We've got like somebody who you say should hate us, but they think we're great. So like what gives? What gives?
And they're using the word ally because we know that like in linguistic studies, it's been very well established that co-opting progressive language is really popular. So calling them ally Americans is like a wink and a nod to people being like, be an ally, right? And so it's so cute,
have known this
right?
For decades. They've known this for decades that this worked, right?
But then they still have this old school idea of like dual loyalty, like split loyalty, right? And they call them hyphenate Americans because they're like, sure, they might be naturalized, they might even be born here, but they have a loyalty to the place that their family came from. Right. And that includes Stephen Miller's family. They're considered hyphenate Americans, even though they've been here for 120 years.
The term hyphenated American has like become even more loaded than like it once was when it was still very much loaded, right? Like hyphenated American can refer to, as we've noted, right, Israeli American, African American, right, Mexican American, but it can also refer to, as it so often did, the hyphenated nature of naming structures, right? And the desire to like eliminate that as a part of becoming American. Like as a part of becoming American, we have to like disregard all of the rich and luscious history of like our Portuguese name, right? Of our proper, right? And the same thing happened. I mean, we look at those now because they're the most, pressing, and for sure we should, but the Scandinavians had a whole naming system and structure too, right? Where it's just
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I'm like Troy's son, I'm
Yeah.
Trent Troy's son, right? And
Right. It
then
only goes back one generation.
it only goes right. So like my last name is like a time capsule for when my family came
When there was a
um,
nail
to the
somewhere.
New World. Yes, and there was. I
Yeah.
found him. I promise.
Aw.
Yeah,
Well,
but
right. And like, looking at my family tree, they
right,
would never refer to me as a hyphenated American because I'm an English American,
right,
right? And English is in their group of acceptable people because I come from good Anglo-Saxon stock, right? And my husband comes
right.
from good Norwegian stock. Like, we are properly white, and therefore we're not hyphenated Americans, even though we can trace our families back to
Yes.
other countries that are not America.
Yeah.
And that is why I wanted to bring in the rhetorical, the linguistic device of markedness. Markedness is the way that you delineate normal default things from special cases. And it is totally not actually natural, right? It's
Right.
totally artificial.
Yeah.
It's done for reasons, for ideological reasons. And so me being an English American, right, makes me the unmarked case. It makes me a normal kind of person to be.
Right.
And it makes me part of like the protected class. Of course, now I've fucked it up, right, by being woke. So now I'm like a woke American. But,
You are.
if I
You are.
hadn't done that, that's
You're
what
a
I would be.
you're a cultural traitor, Caitlin.
Yeah, right.
With your pink hair.
And so Stephen Miller is trying to do this sleight of hand to make anybody who came before 1965, basically, the unmarked case.
Yeah.
And people who come because we're now allowing people who aren't white to immigrate, those are the marked case. But the line of what makes you marked and unmarked is so movable. And it's clear that his allies in the white nationalist movement would like to move it before his appearance, right? A
Yeah.
lot of them are like, if you weren't here during the Civil War, then you're
Right.
not like properly American. Some of them are like, if you didn't come over on a goddamn boat from Spain, like you're not. Right?
It's true.
The line could be anywhere.
Well,
if you didn't land on Plymouth fucking Rock, then you're not like a proper American.
Well, again, we go back for a moment and we say, how does a child become an edgelord, right? And I think that if we actually just look at like the current circumstance and system of edgelords, we could probably figure out. A few episodes ago, I made a joke about how during the French Revolution, like the teenagers that were growing up during that time, like many of them became royalists. There was like a young youth royalist movement, right? Because it's like anything that is cool to your parents is lame as shit, right? So like I can very much see like Stephen Miller being like a little shit edgelord child and being like, oh, like
he was a
free society.
I mean, there's kind of like an archetype of person, which is like somebody who is rich and white and lives in like a rich white area, and then they experience like a little bit of a setback. And this is what happened to Stephen Miller, right? Is he was like a rich white Santa Monica kid, and then like his dad had a business problem, and they ended up having to move to like a smaller house in a neighborhood that was more racially diverse than his other one. And like he just took that as, this is the ultimate insult to me and my family and my rights as a special boy, and took it out on everybody around him, right? And like what you see right now, Stephen Miller today is just a grown-up special little boy. Like he hasn't really like, I feel there's this horrible little boy inside always trying to like get out, right? And you can see on his very first TV interview when he was a teenager or I guess he was a college kid. He was a college
Duke.
Republican, right?
Yeah, Duke.
He was a Duke, right? And he got on TV and he looks all of 45 years old, right? But he's like 19, 20 years old. And he's talking his bullshit. And the interviewer like stops him and is like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 19, sir. And he's like, wow, you're really smart. And that's like such a good little time capsule of like who this person is.
Well,
is a precocious baby who's just bald now.
The internet has long noted, and we will bring it up here as well as it is important. Men will do anything to avoid therapy, right? And that includes like white nationalism and like ethnic cleansing, clearly, because this man, as you've noted, is her child who just comes on the
Yeah.
camera and just speaks like somebody who is profoundly damaged person. And if he
Arrested
wasn't so
Development,
bad,
I think.
right, if he wasn't such a piece of shit, you'd feel bad for him for
Right.
that state that he's in, because it's miserable.
No,
But
but
of course,
and somehow he's managed to find a wife who appears like, for all intents and purposes, turned on by his cruelty. Right?
unbelievable.
Fucking loves it. And if you ever suggest that her special, amazing, racist ass husband might not be a great dude, she will lose it on her
Unbelievable.
goddamn podcast where she talks about how sexy he is, and everybody just has to be like, what the fuck do you mean?
Who is turning? I mean, I know, everybody has different audiences, and we respect our audience being the best. Of course, we respect that. But the question that I have is, who is tuning in to listen to Katie Miller like dish about like how sexy? I mean, she said some like things that are gross to hear, like
Right.
about like he's like like I don't want to hear how he's like a sexual stallion in your opinion. Like,
Yeah,
stop
Dynamo
talking.
or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like, get out of here. Absolutely not. The driest anybody has ever been, I think, probably, is in his presence, right? Like, how can you possibly sorry for getting, graphic, but it is absolutely wild. You would never in a million years catch me bragging about how much I enjoy sex with essentially Hermann Goering. Like, what the fuck do you mean?
Mr. Hitler
Heinrich
is so
Himmler
nice.
really knew what he was doing. The fuck do you mean? Who
Right.
cares?
Stop using those words out loud
Yeah.
into a microphone.
Shut
Stop.
up. Shut up.
Yeah.
Shut up. Yeah, you didn't have Eva Braun like getting on the mic and being like, my guy Adolf. Like, shut up. Nobody wants to hear it.
Let me just say though, for the record, that if that all happened in 2025, the Eva Braun podcast would absolutely exist, and we'd have to hear dumb shit like that. So
we'd have to do an episode on it. We would have to. We'd have to play clips. And you know how much I hate figuring out the technology of playing clips, but I'd have to do it.
Can you imagine Daniel Carlson's reactions to this? I mean, it would just be, it would be stunning.
No, we'd have to get Maureen back on is what we'd have to do, and re-traumatize her.
Oh my God. Yes, nothing was as good as that singular clip
I'm
of
so
her
sorry,
saying
Maureen.
that
I remain penitent. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to bring up was the idea of suicide, because for me, that raises alarm bells, not just because obviously it's completely fucked up, right? To talk about this civilization is committing suicide by inviting people over. But for me, it is reminiscent of the conversations in Europe about letting Muslims in, right? That they said, we are inviting our own demise. We are committing suicide by allowing people to come into our country who are rapist, murderous, barbaric, monster animal people, right? All of that rhetoric is reminiscent here. But also, okay, the anti-woke liberal crowd uses the same kind of rhetoric, right? To talk about how allowing wokeness into our institutions is a kind of suicide. And you will see these pieces, books, articles, whatever, that include phrases like suicidal empathy, and talking about how empathy and thinking about other people, understanding their perspectives, caring about them, taking care of them is suicide. Right. That kind of rhetoric, we cannot allow a squeak of it. It cannot happen because it is evil. It is literally the devil, right? And it is saying being a human, doing the things humans fundamentally are built to do, which is care for each other, is somehow going to hurt us and we need to cut it off. Do not cut off your humanity. Never allow anyone to convince you that cutting off humanity is beneficial.
Absolutely. And that's what, when you hear people using liberal as a pejorative, people who seemingly are liberal or leftish, when you hear them using that word as a pejorative, that is almost certainly what they are thinking, right? That's almost certainly what they have in their mind. It's somebody who is willing to, like, kind of stand up, but also like, hey, if there's somebody that we can throw under the bus right now, like, that will protect the rest of us, and we just have to, maybe, I don't know, trans people or climate change or Caitlin, those big old 4-syllable words you love using, god damn it, right? If we can just get rid of those, then we will have attained the MAGA voter. He will turn his back on the ethnic cleansing and the police brutality, and he will join us, right?
Yeah, right. It's always a way of saying, don't talk about that. Don't think about ways to describe what's happening and who people are and what's happening to them, right? It's just a way to shut down discussion by saying, like, whoops, you're being a little woke there. You're being kind of a bleeding heart liberal, aren't you? Isn't that a little bit emotional of you? Isn't that like a little knee-jerk of you? All of that. I had to learn early on, as somebody whose feelings are very much in the front,
Sure,
that like, there's no point in shutting that down because it will make me a worse thinker, right? Denying the thoughts that are going through your head makes you worse at processing them and coming to the correct conclusion. And like, people who have known me since I was a kid remember like an important developmental, like formative story about me like crying in English class. And then the next day the English teacher came in and was like, listen, we got emotional yesterday, but it was for a reason. Like, we had to think about things that make us emotional so that we can figure it out. If we had just cut it off, stopped thinking about it because somebody might have got upset, i.e. me, sensitive Caitlin, we would have been all done moving forward on the issue. And so like that has really stuck with me, that like, I may not always be right, but if I deny the feeling of empathy or whatever the feeling is that's coming, I'm all done thinking. And that's no good, right? We need to think through issues so we can solve them. So this whole suicide of a civilization, suicide because of empathy, suicide because of welcoming people in, it is something that we need to recognize for what it is, which is telling people to stop thinking. Yeah. Stop trusting your own interpretation of reality. Because you have to trust yourself.
But this transcends just this particularity, right? Because if we look at the innovation of LLMs all over, right, this is also another facet of stop thinking. Stop appraising the world. Yeah, right. Just outsource clicking on something, right? Tell your phone to do it. Absolutely renege on all accountability, on all responsibility. We'll take it from here, right? You're in good hands with the tech overlords. You're in good hands with the fascist overlords. No big deal.
Why would we ever think that? Why? When has that ever been the case, right? But like, all of those feelings that you're having, that like, these masked people coming into our communities and tearing people out of our homes against our will, that's bad. It's not because you're hysterical. It's not because you're, knee-jerk reacting without thinking about it. It is backed up by the facts. We know that immigrants from anywhere can be good community members to us, that they are people who enrich our lives, and that even if they didn't materially benefit us, it is our moral duty to accept them in and take care of them just because they are people. And we also know criminality is lower for immigrants. Immigrants pay more taxes than we spend on them. All of these little like policies that Trump is putting out to tell us, oh, I'm taking care of it. I'm saving us all this money. We're not going to be putting money into people that hate us or whatever, right? What did he do? He took back the temporary protected status of Somalis in America. Right. Do you know how many Somali people in the entire country were on temporary protected status? It is 705 in the whole country. Like, he just fucked over 705 people for no benefit other than his own clout as a cool racist who hurts people, right? And like I said, 87% of Somali people in Minnesota are naturalized citizens. If you're looking for assimilation, which I'm fucking not, right? If you're looking for assimilation, you got it, dude. You have got it.
Culture does not continue to develop and evolve without new culture. It
Right.
needs that external coming in, growing off of it. If you keep it suffocated, that's exactly what'll happen. It'll die. It
Mm-hmm.
needs
Right.
all the people coming in expressing themselves, because we look at other people and this is one of, I think, humanity's greatest traits, is that so often, if left to ourselves, we'll look at other people and be like, well, that's really interesting, that seems similar to something we do, or hey, that's a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting way to do that, like we don't do it that way, like it seems like it's more efficient, right?
Yeah.
And they do the same thing. They're like, oh wow, like this is a fascinating thing, we're not used to this, right? We could
Right.
utilize this, and that is just, I think, the base level of like the beauty of not just humans, which are an animal, but like all animals.
Yeah.
We so focus oftentimes on the Malthusian or the Darwinian, right? But Kropotkin was like, hey, there are like little birds that hang out in alligator mouths, and
Yeah.
there are like animals that hang out with other animals that you think should be
Right.
like eaten, but actually they like aren't eaten. They're like friends,
Right.
right? Like we could actually all work
Right.
together as well. Like the world is aggressive, but it's also filled with mutuality,
Yeah.
and we just have to
And
look at ourselves.
empathy also evolved. Okay. Empathy is something that was naturally selected for.
Yes,
It is something that you need if you're going to survive in groups, which is what
absolutely.
humans do. It's what all
Absolutely.
primates do.
But I wanted to bring one other thing up that you said just a moment ago, right? Doesn't serve us, right? Or doesn't serve us monetarily, right?
Yeah.
We are a sick, profoundly sick society to suspect that only things that materially serve us are worth considering. That is
Right.
not healthy. That is actually extreme. That is
Yeah.
an extreme, not only in
Right.
our current political spectrum, but across human existence. That is an extreme stance to take. And we shouldn't take
Yeah.
it. We should fight back and push back against it, as you've noted,
That's right.
Caitlin.
Yeah. We are served by having friends. We are served by having neighbors. We are served by having people around us. And if those people come from another country, awesome. Tell me about it. What's life like where you come from?
Right,
How's it going now? Do you
right,
need some eggs? Shut the
right.
fuck up about the monetary, like tax, whatever. I don't care. Like
No.
the math doesn't even work for your monetary fixation. But even if it did, it's worth it to me
Yeah,
to have people around. We need them.
absolutely. Absolutely. And
It's
and
it's just
and
out of
and
control.
we're craving this connection. I mean, and it's so obvious. When I was staying in Georgia for a year, when I was helping my mom, she was helping me. We were helping each other. It was a mutual thing. Um, she had a neighbor they were all from Saudi Arabia, right? And super nice, super cool, beautiful little children, right? But as so many folks do, like keep their head down, keep to themselves, right? Don't want to cause any stir, right? I walked out of the house one day. He had a plate of beautiful food. I smelled it. I was like, oh, that smells amazing. And he was like, oh, it's this. And I'm like, oh, it sounds really good. It's like a risotto and chicken, right? And I'm like, that sounds so delicious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I ran out to do errands and I came back and his family had brought me a plate of food, right?
Man.
Because it was delicious. Just because we are craving that. We don't always want to admit it, right? But there's a reason why we choose to go to the cashier instead of the self-checkout, because
Yep.
maybe it's nice to talk to somebody and see how they're doing.
I'm on record as a curbside pickup lady, but I understand. But still, that means somebody comes to see me at my car.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
he's so nice.
Yes, and you
And
get to
we
be
all
nice
talked about
too.
exactly. We're all like, oh, who's it gonna be? Because it's one of three people always at the grocery store. Because they go at the same time. And so we're like, who's it gonna be this time? And then they come out and we say, hi, it's me, Caitlin Green, groceries, please. And it's great because people, like if you really cut yourself off from people, either by not having access to them or by being a fucking evil piece of shit that no one wants to hang out with,
You become
like
Stephen
it
Miller.
does hurt you. If you act like Stephen Miller, you only find evil people to hang out with, and they don't feed you emotionally. and you become this horrible Arrested Development husk of a sad, angry boy with no maturity, no brains in your head.
Remember when he painted hair on that time?
No, he didn't, did he? Oh God.
Well, we'll leave that
Dude,
for.
I mean, like, truly just shave it. You're gonna look fine. Your head's not a weird shape, I promise. Everybody's head is a weird shape. Just let it go.
Let it go.
I say this as a person with so much hair. Like, I truly don't know the problem. I don't know the pain.
I say it as somebody who has lots of hair, but is certainly relying on the English community to get hair stuff fixed sooner than later. You know, it's a great bald nation, the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
But at Oxford, they've got folks working on it night and day to make sure you can grow your hair back. We'll see about that.
You know, science truly is miraculous. I'm so glad we have access to it. Hair care is healthcare, Trent.
This is gender affirming care. Absolutely. I don't care what anyone says.
Well, I think that's all I really wanted to cover. I could yell for 2 more hours, I think. But I wanted to highlight some of those rhetorical tricks when you talk about suicide, when you talk about some things as a special case for reasons that don't seem justified. It's because they're not. It's because the person is trying to trick you. If you want to live in America, you're an American. It's very silly to try to make other rules that have to do with like where your grandparents were born. Like, get out of here. Or your great grandparents. I don't care. Go away. Talk to somebody else because we're sick of it. We've heard it enough. And that's the other thing is we don't have to entertain bad arguments over and over again just because somebody wants to say it again. No. If we've covered it, it's covered. Shut up. We're done.
No. And something that Caitlin and I have brought up in the past multiple times with multiple different guests is that we don't have to hand it to anybody. Okay, we don't have to say that the Republicans have done a great job of doing this, that they actually deserve credit here. That's not true. And so we don't have to do that. And they won't do that for us ever. They are never going to say any of those things. Not even for a second. Not even for a moment.
And that's the other thing too is, you know, Gavin Newsom got brought up. And I was like, do I say it right now or do I say it later? But, you know, the fact that he is maybe doing a good job on immigration right now does not negate the fact that he's been a piece of shit about trans people. Mm-hmm. And it does not negate the fact that his tactic of like trolling Donald Trump in a sort of Republican style is maybe not my preferred tactic because I think it legitimizes their style. Right. You know, and actually like scores points for them. You know, that all of those practices still exist and I still hate them and I will not vote for him in a Democratic primary. But for the sake of people living in California, I'm glad that he's doing this for immigrants.
Right. We're pro Pritzker here on the program, to be sure.
He knows what he's doing because he will speak plainly and say like, you call it woke, I call it being a decent human. Like, let's talk about how everybody in my community is worth protecting. Great. I love that. It's simple, it's plain, it's understandable. We don't need to do our 4-syllable words, whatever.
We don't.
You can still be plain about this.
We don't. And it's again, it's worth noting before we head out that that there's a reason why so many of our presidents have been governors of their states because it's a great sort of showcase of, hey, this is what I do here. And honestly, it'd be really cool if we did some of that stuff nationally, right?
That's right.
And so
they really do. They work in a different system than representatives and senators do. And you can really see it when they get out there and speak plainly in a way that you're like, oh, right. You are not part of Congress. You are your own thing. Got it.
Very good. Well, Caitlin, it's always a pleasure, especially when we have such wonderful guests like Greg Sargent on the program.
The best.
And of course, all of our listeners, they know, just like we do, that understanding a question is half of an answer. This is, of course, Half the Answer with your hosts, Trent R. Nelson and Caitlin M. Green. And until we do this thing all over again, we'll catch you real soon, all right?
Yeah, here's to the happy days that we are bringing. It's happening.
Yeah, it's BYOHD. and we got it right underneath our shoulder.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.